So currently I've got my own production company, which is called Superlative Pictures, and I kind of, through that, I'm trying to develop a couple of films and a TV show and stuff like that. But aside, I suppose in with that, I also do a lot of kind of corporate government, and like probably most recently here, I was working for Northern Pictures, who do Love on the Spectrum and Better Day Than Never, and they were doing a TV series here with Michael Theo, who is the main character from, I shouldn't say character, who is a real person from Love on the Spectrum. He kind of, is autistic, and it was his first kind of foray into TV comedy with two British actors. It's going to be, so I was line producing that series, which when I'm line producing, I'm managing kind of the whole team and role and whatever.
Hands-on, line.
Yeah. There's a few that I've got in development. One is called Little One, and is based on a book about a man here who was adopted by his auntie had him in Greece, and she gave the baby to his mother here, and he didn't find out until later on that his mother wasn't his mother and his auntie was in fact his mother. And so it's a book based on that, which is sort of shot between here and Greece. There's another one which is like a TV series about a group of boys growing up in Maroubra, which is called Grommets. And we've been trying to pitch, but haven't had any success yet. It's kind of like the UK's Top Boy, which is another show. Because it's a bit hard with shows and films. You just got to kind of find the right people at the right time who want to develop it. The other one with another director who I did another film with is called Mother Trucker, and it's about a woman who schooled both her children in the cab of the truck on the road. She's in WA in Pilbara, but whether or not we'd sort of set it there, and so it's about that kind of story, how the career of being a truck driver allowed her to then get away from the abusive relationship she was in, but also be able to school her children on the road, so she became homeschooling in them. And I think that's an eye-opening one for life. What life would be like also for a female truck driver on the road, because then when you think about all those road stops and what they're like, they're not really catered for a woman with kids in the car showing up.
I've travelled once from Perth to Melbourne on a truck, on a semi-trailer. Very interesting experience, and back across the Ngunnawal. Very interesting experience. Then the truck stops.
Yeah, I know it is, right. I did a film in Cooper Pedy called Limbo with Ivan Sen was the director, and Simon Baker was in it. It was on the ABC last year, and just got, I think, Best Independent Film at the Actors.
Wow.
But it when we were leaving Cooper Pedy, there was like a guy on a motorbike who was pulled onto the side of the road, and we were driving back to Adelaide, and I was all like, I've seen that movie and I'm going to keep going. I am not the person to stop for you here. It's like, we're way ready to get out of that town. Even that
first-hand knowledge.
Isolating drive the whole way from there up, like straight through the middle. Is
in the 90-mile straight, there's no bend, no curve, no nothing for 90 miles.
But they're still like warning you about, be careful, because sometimes there might be a camel on the road, or there might be cattle on the road, or so it's interesting.
Interesting.
So if we start from the beginning, so when I was in year 12, I won a competition that was an Australian Teachers of Media award, and the prize that I got was work experience. So everybody else got, I feel like other people won like DVD players or cash prizes.
More work for you.
I got like this, and anyway, so hilariously, took the work experience. It was at Grey Advertising here in Canberra at the time. So it would have been 1995, and after my, I think, as a child sheltered, I'd lived in North Canberra. I'd hardly ever been over the bridge to Kingston, and they put me in a little room and got me to rewrite ads, and it was in Maggie Shepherd's old building, and up sort of on the corner of that street there was a petrol station. I didn't even know where Green Square was. I'd just go and get my lunch from the petrol station every day, and because when you're the work experience person in that day, they'd put you in a little room and be like, just leave her there to do what they do. But then I got to the end of the week and they said, oh, we'd like to offer you a job as a junior writer. Would you consider that? And I think at the time I had applied to go to university and do oceanography, so I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then my mum and dad were like, you should, take the job. And I think I was saying, one thing that I feel like is no matter what job you do, you get to know what you're good at. Like, are you good with people? Are you good with numbers? Are you good at planning? I feel like you can do kind of many jobs and find out where some of your skills are. Anyway, so mum and dad had said yes, and I didn't know much about it. I felt like I was sheltered from that whole industry at the time. I'd grown up in Canberra. There were lots of public servants and lots of tradesmen, but there weren't a lot of other, careers that you were seeing or even thinking about at that point in your life. And so I said yes and took the job and, spent some time there being a writer, and then I moved over to be a kind of creative coordinator where I was helping the kind of design studio and them do some commercials, and then moved more into being the agency producer, so doing the commercials from that side, which is kind of what I liked more. And then I left that. I knew I was going to go and try and live in London for a while, so I left that job and went and worked at another agency just as an account manager, because I was thinking that more experience as an advertising account manager would be more useful if I was going overseas. So I did that for a few months before I left, which was with Judy, and then I went to the UK, and it was hard, I think, at that time to further your career because the visa requirements were that you couldn't. But I did get a job working for PlayStation at the time that was in Soho, and spent, over a Christmas period working for them and for another group that was called the European Marketing Group. So I did get some other sort of good jobs in between. But then on the back of some bad contracts or bad jobs, I decided I was going to come home and go to university. And at that same time I went to see a production company here that I'd worked with when I was at the ad agency, and they were looking to hire someone new, and they said, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be a producer. And they said they'd never had anyone at that time come in and say exactly what they wanted to be. Like, people came in and went, I want to write and produce and maybe a bit of directing or whatever, but they were like, you were really clear with what you wanted to be. So I started with them full-time, and then I started a degree at the University of Canberra, and I did both full-time across that period. And then, and I worked with them for a number of years before then I left and took a job working on a HBO series called The Pacific that was being shot in Port Douglas. And I took a different role in that. I was coordinating the makeup and special effects sort of departments. And that was the transition into seeing something at a bigger scale. Obviously here, the production company I'd worked at had done a lot of corporate and commercial work, and so I'd seen things at one particular scale, and I remember thinking, I wonder why films cost so much or whatever. And then I remember being on the first day of that particular job, and there was like a tank rolling in. They were bringing in palm trees on the backs of trucks and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's why things cost a little bit more. There was 750 crew. They were accommodating us all up there, and it was a 12-month job. So I did that, and then after that I sort of established my own kind of little production company, and then I was like, I went for another job, and it was as a producer's assistant on it was for I think he was a Kiwi producer, and he was doing a Vin Diesel film in Australia, or was considering doing one. I went to the interview at Fox, and he looked at my CV and he said, why are you here? And I was like, for the jobs, the producers. And he was like, I think it's just time that you hung your hat on the door and said you were a producer. And I was like, so no job? But it was actually, ended up not doing the film in Australia, but it was actually one of the best pieces of advice, because I was like, oh, if he thinks that that's what I should be and he's done a whole bunch of big projects, then I really do just need to say that's what I am. And so, yeah, sort of, I suppose, full circle then. I was doing corporate and commercial work in between. I think I did some tutoring at the university, and then I was working on there was a film that was shooting here which was called Joe Cinque's Consolation, based on Helen Garner's book, and I hopped on to line produce that film. And then after that film, I went on to do another film called Hearts and Bones with Hugo Weaving, with Matt Reeder, who was the producer that I'd done that film here with. I went and did that in Sydney, and then after that, I've done another film called Six Festivals, which was the first Australian acquisition by Paramount as a streamer when they did it. Hearts and Bones, the one that I did with Hugo and Ben Lawrence directed, was premiered at the Sydney Film Festival and then at Toronto. I did another film called Limbo, which was with Ivan Sen in Kipapedia for Banya Productions, and then I did another film called Audrey, which is actually this weekend premiering at South by Southwest, which is in Texas, and then I did more recently last year was the first kind of move over to be line producing a TV series for Northern. So yeah, in between a bit of other stuff. So it's kind of nice sometimes to go back to doing the like corporate and commercial jobs, because they're much more simple, but I also, love a big project with a large team of creatives and a big budget. That's right. I like
exotic places.
Yeah. Sometimes not so exotic. I think actually Port Douglas and the first kind of TV show where there was like a jacuzzi on my balcony or whatever, it was a bad introduction, because Cooper Petey, not the same. We're in like kind of like a gated community, not the same. I haven't got back to one which has been
and no jacuzzi on the deck.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't got back to one like that yet. I think, sometimes I say to people that I'm like a goldfish, because I'm like, yes, this is nice, and then I'm like, let's move on. That's that short term, the shorter nature of a project of getting it out and delivered. But I think what I really like about producing is I like that creative involvement, and it's funny, now I feel like I would like to be doing a bit more writing as well, which, I did my major in when I was at uni, but I haven't kind of thought back to that. But I do like, being able to be involved in a project and have that creative input. And I like when, it's greenlit and finance getting it up and trying to hire the right group of people to bring that together. Because one thing I always sort of, with film projects, directors generally don't have as much experience as all the crew, or as many experiences. And so I feel like when you're bringing that team together, it's kind of carefully curating some personalities that can work together, and they're all sort of special because they have worked independently the whole time, so they can choose what they do. But also they bring, years of experience to a filmmaker or a director and their project. So, which is beneficial to the whole team. So I suppose that's what I like about it. When I was thinking about how like you lead people in that way, creative people need to be fulfilled in what they're doing. And so I think like for me it's really important when we're looking at them, I'm like, well, what is it that you actually want to be? So they might come into a role and it might be in this area, but that's actually not where their interests lie. And so I do try and go, okay, well, where do you want to be? And okay, well, while you're here, let's try and get you some experience in that and kind of pass on those bits of advice to people, because I feel like they need that. But you know, generally that environment is such a collaborative environment and is constantly coming up with creative solutions that meet, you know, budgets and schedules, which are both. And sometimes you are like I always say that no one knows what a producer does until something goes wrong, and then they're like, "Where's the producer?" But if nothing goes wrong, they're like, "Wow, this was just such a magical day." You know, it's true. Even in corporate, you know, world, I think that often they'll think, "Oh, that was so easy," and I'm like, "Yes, because there was a whole bunch of pre-planning before we got here." You know, we looked at the weather, we looked at what they were going to wear, we looked at talking to all the people, like places we were going to go to make sure we had permissions to be there. We didn't magically know where we were going to park our cars. We'd already planned that, or you know, lunch just didn't appear. All of those things. So I think, you know, a lot of the stuff that I do on that side is also kind of being a crisis. I think I'd be good as crisis kind of management type person as well if I was going to change my career, because it's all about, okay, well, how do I fix these things and what problems can I see coming and what knowledge do I have? And I think to be able to solve those problems, and I think that's what all the working on all those different jobs and constantly changing what the requirements are is what makes you then better at it the next time, because you go, okay, well, that happened, so I'm never going to do that again.
Or never work with that person.
Or never work. That's correct as well. You know. I would say that it's often kindness and probably good humour are two of the things that I want in that, because I always say to people, well, the job's hard enough without me having to deal with difficult personalities, because we work long hours and there's often expectations that things have to be finished in a short time. So it's kind of it is a little bit high pressure when it comes to some of those things. So I feel like there's traits that you need in the people that are working to be able to make that process nicer and smoother. So I think that, I guess in terms of how you bring them together, I think that's how I identify them is, you know, I'm probably honest in what my expectations are from the beginning about this is what the job is, and then it is also, you know, meet the creatives, see whether you get along and whether you and it's, you know, sort of getting to know you phase that makes it so that if they like the director and they can be part of that vision and they feel like they can be attached and help, then, well, not help, but be creatively involved and feel like they'll get that satisfaction, then I think that's important. I think job satisfaction for people who get to choose where they work, I think is really important, and also, you know, who they get to work with. So they do want it to be a, you know, kind of collaborative, happy environment. One of the things that you have to do because of that particular environment is you can't let something go. Like, you can't let it stew for a while. It may be in other workplaces they might let something kind of go on. But if somebody has an issue, whether it be, you know, work-related or personal related, or whether it's, you know, stress or sadness or anything else, it's kind of like you actually need to address it straight away in order to get them back to focusing on what that job is. So I feel like in that way, probably as a leader, you need to make sure that your lines of communication are open and that you're as approachable as possible so that you can deal with those things, and also so that you are, and I think it's like one of those good things for future leaders, is you do need to have that emotional intelligence enough to be able to read people. And my concern on future leaders, and particularly a generation that I see coming through now, is that they lack some of those social skills, because I feel like they've been so, which, you know, might be an assumption, but they've been so drawn in by screens, and the classrooms are Google Classrooms, and we do all of these things now, that I feel like there's a bit of a portion lacking, because the younger ones coming through, they can kind of, they seem to be able to write well, whether that's ChatGPT or them. They seem to be able to present okay enough in an interview, but they actually aren't great at socially reading a situation. And I just wonder if that's the screen difference that has contributed to that. I also remember on another job, I had hired a young person, and I'd ask him to do something, and he'd go to email to get the, to get the answer, and I'd be like, no, use the telephone. It's much quicker. You can ring and you talk to, but they're so not used to do.
Behind.
Yeah, they're not used to doing that.
Yeah.
So, and he said to me that it was like some of the best advice was that I'd been like, pick up the phone and get me an answer like now. I don't want to wait. So I think that's the other thing, is because we're always moving forward. You're like, okay, I've got to look in 2 weeks, and I need to make sure that permissions for me going to that place are sorted, and that we have the people, and that we have everything we need, that you need everybody to get up to your speed of execution.
Yeah.
I think I came from a family where my father was always really hardworking, and the office was built at home, was based from home, and so I feel like I always had that kind of work ethic in place. I think culturally, Brooke knows that my grandfather was Indigenous and was stolen, put in a home in Kinchella and then in Bomaderry. But we didn't know. My father didn't tell us a lot about that background, because at the time it was not. He was born in 1933, and there was kind of more of a great shame to it. So there was nothing. It wasn't talked about. And if anybody asked, he'd just let them assume that he was Maltese or something else instead, because being Aboriginal wasn't looked upon favourably, and I don't think he wanted that for his children. So my journey with that part of my life is a little bit disjointed. But I think that regardless of that side of things, my father provided a good. He just worked so hard to probably at the time be the opposite to what the societal expectations were of someone who was from an Indigenous background in the 50s. So I feel like the part of the work ethic comes from that, and from my mum as well. She was always still working when we were young, and I have 3 older brothers, so there was a lot to do. And obviously Dad was running his own business, so she was helping with that as well, and was busy growing up. And I think probably a lot of the stuff that I always say that my mum's got like 4 degrees, because helping all of the children through their studies. But I feel like, she could have been easily in a creative field had there been the opportunity. And I remember her saying that her art teacher had gone to her parents and said, she could go to Paris and be really successful as an artist and come back to Australia. And her parents had said, no, she's going to be a teacher. And so she'd gone to, be a teacher at that time. And I wonder whether or not, funny how intergenerationally like that, sometimes someone else gets a go at the creative stuff. But I feel like, a lot of what I do is probably from her too. I think you are shaped, well, it's that same thing, right? You are shaped by your personal experiences, you are shaped by your
Exactly.
home life and your childhood, you are shaped by, and again, like thinking about leadership, every person you've interacted with, and whether or not they're a poor leader or a great leader, what things you take from them. And I think as you get older, you can look back at, past people you might have worked for and think, I wonder at the time, what else was going on for them, or was it their first business that they were starting and I was one of their first employees and how they manage that. Because often, like in smaller businesses, you know, there's not someone, and I always say it about film too, I'm like, there is no HR. There's no one that you're going to be managed just about your, you know, workplace or your role.
Yeah.
You know, you're there. It's that we sort of sit here, and then there's a bunch of other heads of departments that sit here, but they all still want your assistance if there's issues within their area. And it's not, you know, and I think it's common for small businesses not to have any of that. And I think that we all sort of start our careers without thinking. And I remember actually one of the managing directors I had at an ad agency said to me that he never intended to be the MD. He kind of like, you know, he obviously got to that role, but he didn't actually want to manage people. He liked the creative side of the role. And, you know, but managing people comes into it. And I think you sort of see it in, you know, my husband has his own building business as well, and I see it with him too. Like, we got to the point where I was like, oh, it's managing people, and now he's gone back to just sort of working by himself because it's hard. And it takes away from what you like doing as well. So I suppose, again, that's probably the joy of me being able to go on to a job for a certain period where I get to do a bit of that, and then I get to go back into my own little self-reflecting bubble. You know? In film, it's unusual I don't want to say it's unusual. There's lots of people that can't do those hours and have children as well.
It's very uncommon. Or we don't
do you know
talk
what?
about
If I
it.
wasn't a single, if I was a single parent, I actually don't think I could do those hours because there is nothing that caters for. There is no childcare that ever catered for, you know, me to be able to go to work at 5 a.m. in the morning, or for me to be able to work nights or anything like that, or to travel. And you know, I remember when I did do a film here when the kids were little. And, you know, I had to hire a nanny to come in the mornings and to get one to a play group and mind the other one. That I remember going to buy the crew coffees one day and I was like, wow, that actually I'm earning less than... By the time I paid the nanny, I was like, I feel like I was earning less than the runner. So I was literally, you know, sometimes in my career, I've just been in things to make sure that I've kept going, like, and even after I had, I think, Arlo, there was a commercial I was doing, and I remember I went to the set with him, you know, strapped to my chest and had to go and breastfeed him under a tree, like, because there wasn't that support where you could suddenly just pull someone in like that. So my husband has been critical in being able to make it so that I can do those, that I have been able to do those kind of creative jobs that I like, that he knows that I like doing as well and I get satisfaction from. So without that, I wouldn't be able to do that stuff. And I think, you know, what Brooke and I have talked about, but like a busy person seems to find more time where you're like... I think it's important, and I think it's interesting as well when you do like take a board position to be able to think, oh, actually I do have knowledge and insight that I have gained across my career that I can share, whereas we don't. And that's that same thing, I guess, of like when you think about yourself as a leader and have that time to reflect upon yourself, you go, oh, actually there are things that I do that you know, can be beneficial, like you know, are beneficial to other people. And I think even the other day I sort of met with a writer and she was talking about a project she wanted to write, and I was like, oh, well, you know, you probably should do this, and then you should do this, and then you should do this, and then you should see whether that's still the story that you want to write. And I kind of left that going, if only someone would pay me to be the person who just gives advice.
Well, come and talk to us.
There are jobs.
I was like, I feel like I need to retrain. It's funny, you know, but universities are the same. Like I remember when I was like, well, how come like and part of it is obviously the way that they structure degrees and payments for those degrees. But I was like, if you're sending like film students through and you want to be a director, well then you should be doing, film history at ANU, and you should be probably doing psychology so you understand an actor or something, and some kind of like human movement or something like that, the drawing on those resources. But I also remember being there and thinking, how come these students aren't talking to these design students to try and make the output of your work better? Because that leads to success for all.
Yeah.
But we aren't great at trying to forge those things. Whereas I feel like, often my job is like that. Like even when we were shooting that series here and I couldn't find a film caterer in Canberra. So there's not, in every other like big city in Australia, there are caterers that come in, they pull in a van like a food truck and they make everything from that every day. And they come at the hours that we work, and there was
interesting. Yeah.
There was not a company. Well, I ended up getting a company here, a caterer out of Kitchen Witchery, they're called, out of Fishwick, and they came and we ended up doing our breakfast, and they came and delivered out. They did like a delivered lunch, but I was like, I've got to find a different way to do it, because otherwise I would have had to bring a company down from Sydney and accommodate them and per diem them across the course of the production, which would add another, $40,000 to the cost, which isn't money that you see on screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you look for a solve that means that then if I want to spend $40,000 on that stunt, which is going to be on the show, or on spending more money on that actor, or pulling in that person to improve our schedule, you've got those funds to do that instead. But it's trying to, find businesses and get them to rethink about how they work, or also, make our team more collaborative. So on that one, our unit manager, who normally is the person who kind of gets there every day and helps set up the base where we all park and stuff like that, we just sort of worked out our own method for doing breakfast every day, and then I kind of did a deal with 3 Meals and Dobinsons and was like, okay, here's the schedule, we need to be able to pick up these things for the next month.
Well, it's a supply chain, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's a reflection of the maturity of the Canberra screen industry, that it's growing, it's getting better, it's not there yet.
Yeah, that's correct.
But that sort of project then starts to build that sort of capacity and shapes it, at least.
Yeah, it shapes that capacity a little bit. But I think you have to do that in a lot of places. You have to kind of think about
educating the market, like
and how what you can do on a particular job to try and like make those saves or whatever.
Yeah.
And because it would happen the same if you're going to shoot in like a regional community as well.
Yeah.
Another job, it was rather than pull in the drone, there's like, companies that specifically fly drones that are big enough to hold a film camera and whatever, and to get them to like that kind of location in Middle Australia, it was the director, who was also the DOP, ended up buying his own drone because it was cheaper to do that than it was to get the company to ship one in.
Wow.
So that's what I mean. We're constantly looking at solves, right? How do you do this? What is a way to do that better?
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it as well. Looking for solves.
I don't know. I have that too. I like Screen Canberra supported me to sort of do some business planning because they would like to, I think, see my business grow beyond just me. And I'm, slightly torn in that because there is obviously at a federal government level, they invest in people and in organisations to help them start up their sort of production companies to help you put people on and try and grow the business that way. But at the same time, when I've not been doing those hours, my daughter's got type 1 diabetes and my kids are still both, 12 and one turns 11 on Friday. So they're still quite young. And I've liked being able to do what I do because it allows me to still be there when I need to be there in that role. And I think, when I'm doing those long hours, I like to then be able to come home not doing them. And I'm concerned that if I'm managing people, that that I'd lose that a little bit. But then when I was sort of talking to this other sort of creative consultant, he was like, but you can choose that. And I think similarly when I'm looking at my leadership style, it's like if you choose to then create a business that engages with or hires people who have, you know, or want a similar value system to what you want, then who's to say that business doesn't work in that way? So, you know, whereas like, you know, I have my office at home, I still might be able to, and I suppose now more than ever when you look at that landscape of people working in a hybrid way, you may be able to find those people. So I feel like, you know, there's an opportunity for me to revisit what my plans are with the business and see whether I can do sort of, you know, take it further, because it would be easier to have it would be beneficial to have somebody else who was on with me helping develop things, because there's a lot of, you know, submission writing and grunt and trying to get in front of the right people or the right investors to get a project up. And I think, you know, to do that you need to be more than, there's only so much you can do as an independent producer by yourself. I think it's interesting. One of the things on the last show that I did, the director, he went and got these badges made, hilarious, that they say who Canberra, and then they have a picture of Parliament House and it says Shanberra Can. Right?
Nice.
It's highly amusing, because we were at the National Library and I thought that they'd all got like a badge which said I visited the National Library, and I was like, oh, we were doing a tech recce and they were all sitting at the table, and then I realised that hilarious. But one of the things is because I did grow up here, and I think is interesting in terms of leadership and your you know, and your career and how you've got there as well, is that you know, lots of other people who come into creative roles have gone through like what might be a creative high school, like Newtown High, and have completely had a journey with creatives, or they come from a family of creatives, and whereas I don't. So like, you know, and I've grown up here, and so all my friends I feel like are in very, very different kind of roles. And so, you know, in one film where there was you know, a need, or there was a neurologist or something, I was like, oh, I know a friend's like wife is a neurologist, we should get her to check the things to make sure what we're saying is accurate. Or, you know, on that same film there was a radio announcer, and I was like, oh, you know, why don't we just get a like proper radio announcer? Like, why don't we try and get Fran Kelly or someone to do the interview with Hugo, rather than cast an actor? And I was like, someone I went to uni with will know Fran Kelly, or work at the ABC, I'll find someone. But I feel like and with that badge of, you know, who Canberra, Shanberra can, is because Darren was like, Darren, who was the director on that project, was like, you know, whenever they'd say, oh, can someone find this? I'd be like, I know someone. They'd be like, it's just,
well connected, but also resourceful.
In this thing. Well, I suppose resourceful and able to find different people. And also I think, you know, probably what complements the role is being like approachable and friendly and all of those things. And you have to, you know, you have to talk to like homeowners about taking over their houses, or parents about tanning their, you know, 6-week-old baby to make it whatever, like, you know, all these things.
Or finding hamsters at the last at the 11th
that's
hour.
Right. Or finding someone. There is like what did I say? There was like a hamster play group or something. ACT for a guinea pig play group. Which when you know you need to find an animal like that, or a yellow car or whatever. Like there's all these things that you just use. You're constantly drawing on your community and your connections to use. But some of that stuff I actually. And interestingly, I think you do in writers' rooms too. If you are present and looking at a series that is being developed, I'll often find that in the room, and I'm sure that it's the case across all writers' rooms, that there's somebody there saying, oh, but that's not how that would be done. So you're constantly, the reason that you can watch something and be drawn into it being true to life is because there are voices in the room that are trying to make it that way.
Make it real,
Yeah.